At the end of the day, people want to look good, feel good, and live longer. And so,
true,
extraordinary. So on April 25th, your second book here, The Plant Paradox, came out, and I had a chance to read an advanced copy when I visited you. And you office both in Santa Barbara and in the desert Palm Springs Desert. So, and the other thing that I realized, and I've been the beneficiary, I've had a chance to actually go out and purchase and get a number of your products on which you can get from GundryMD.com. So more on that a little bit later. But you had a YouTube channel and really a whole set of products for optimum vitality. So let's begin on this. I mean, one of the things that I've realized that is so important is that our bodies actually evolved for an optimum state over the course of hundreds of thousands and millions of years ago. And if you think about why people are obese, for example, today, a lot of it is the fact that, in ancient times, there was no Whole Foods down the street.
True.
And there was no place you could go to get a regular meal, so your body learned to store every fat calorie it possibly could. But I think one of the insights I got from reading your book was that what our genetics, what the molecular machinery of our body evolved to eat was what we ate thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago, not the stuff we eat today.
Correct, yeah.
And we're paying the price for mismatching what our body ideally wants and what we give it.
Correct, yeah.
So that seems like a really logical thing, and I'm just curious about the journey you went through to figure out what the optimal health diet is. And do you mind sort of starting with that?
Sure.
What's your story there?
Well, as you know, I was a very famous heart surgeon and invented a bunch of stuff and did pediatric and baby heart transplants with my partner, Leonard Bailey. But before that, at Yale University, back in the dark ages, I actually had a special major where you could spend 4 years with 3 professors and write a 10-page little research project every week and then have a thesis that you had to defend at the end of 4 years. And that's the only classes I went to. Interesting.
Yeah, I like that self-guided education.
Yeah, it was a dismal failure because none of us could get into medical school because we all had satisfactory. But anyhow, so I think
you did okay.
So we had my major was human evolutionary biology, which we would now call epigenomics and nutrigenomics, but we didn't have a word for it.
Right.
And what I did was, my thesis was you could take a great ape and manipulate its food supply and manipulate its environment and predict that you would arrive at a human being. And that was my thesis. And I successfully defended my thesis and got an honors. And I basically was one of the early people that said we actually began as an aquatic ape.
Oh.
Yeah, and we can go into that later, but it's an interesting theory. That's why we have a big brain.
Huh.
That's actually why we're hairless. So anyhow, I put that aside and went to medical school and became a surgeon. And then I was running 30 miles a week, going to the gym 1 hour a day, eating a healthy vegetarian diet at Loma Linda University, where I was a professor. And I was really overweight. And I had arthritis, I had high blood pressure, pre-diabetes. I actually did baby transplants with migraine headaches. And
with you having migraine headaches at the time. And let's pause 1 second, because I've heard this from many people, right? You do all the right things. You're exercising, you're eating healthy. Okay, you have that little bit of chocolate once in a while, but we'll find out actually polyphenols from chocolate.
It's fantastic.
And from
coffee.
Caffeine is good for you. And you do all those things and you still don't lose the weight. And you're saying, what the heck is going on here? Is it genetic? Am I just predisposed to always be this? But it may well be that you're not actually eating the right things.
Correct. And I was told it was genetic because everything was exactly like my father's. And I go and they say, oh yeah, you got high cholesterol because your dad does, and you're pre-diabetic because your dad is, and you have arthritis because your dad did, and you have high blood pressure because your dad did, and it's genetic, and just, get over it.
How much overweight were you back then?
I weighed 230 pounds. I was about 70 pounds overweight.
You don't have that right now?
No. So I met a guy who changed my life. He was a big fat guy from Miami, Florida with inoperable coronary disease. And I'll shorten the punchline. He cleaned out most of the blockages in his coronary arteries in 6 months by eating a particular way and taking a bunch of supplements from a health food store. And I told him he wasted all his money with supplements. He made expensive urine, which I firmly believed then. I don't anymore. Mm-hmm. And I told him, good for him for losing weight. He lost 45 pounds in 6 months, that he wouldn't do anything in his coronary arteries. But we got another coronary angiogram on him 6 months following his first one, and this guy had cleaned out most of the blockages.
So this is like a calcium score reduction?
Yeah, not calcium score.
This is visual.
This is an angiogram of your heart, and we can see the plaque. Yeah. Calcium score, believe it or not, just kind of tells you what's on the outside of the arteries. Mm-hmm. So I said, tell me how you did this. And he starts describing the diet. And I said, whoa, bells went off. I said, wait a minute, that's my thesis at Yale. And so I called up my parents who live in San Diego, and I said, hey, do you guys still have my thesis? And they said, yeah, it's here in the shrine,
Of course.
the perpetual flame. And I said, oh my gosh, send it up to me. So I put myself on my thesis. And
on the diet on the evolutionary diet.
Yeah, on the evolutionary diet.
So what was it, how far back in time do you think our genetics optimally developed for the plants back then?
Yeah, so, we're a descended from a tree-dwelling ape. We're basically a tree shrew, and tree shrews have been around for 40 million years. And the ape line came out of tree shrews. And so we were designed to actually eat two-leaf plants out of trees primarily, dicotyledons, remember?
Right, from biology in 7th grade, yes.
Yeah. And there are other animals, the grazers, that are designed to eat monocotyledons, the single-leaf plants, the grasses.
Right.
And we're designed to interact with the compounds in two-leaf plants. And we've been interacting with them for millions of years.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's interesting is that these plant compounds also interact with our bacteria. And our microbiome is actually the initial greeting committee for what comes into our mouths. Everything we put into our mouth is actually foreign to us. It's completely foreign material. And it has its own proteins that are foreign. And what those proteins carry is information. Mm-hmm. And so the bacteria are actually designed to eat certain plant proteins better than other plant proteins. And they're designed, if everything's right, to communicate to our immune system that the things you're eating, hey, we've known these guys for 40 million years. Yeah, they're a pain in the neck, I know, but you don't have to get all upset about them. We know them, chill out. Yeah. And that actually worked incredibly well. We continue to eat a lot of plant leaves for most of our evolution. But one of the things that changed dramatically, probably 150,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, is we harnessed fire. And fire was actually the major leap that made us human, because all other animals, all other great apes, can't break down the cell wall of bacteria, can't digest it. We have no digestive ability to do that. Yep. And we require bacteria to do that, to ferment the cell wall.
And by the way, just a slight pause here, just to remind folks, as a human being, you are a collection of somewhere on the order of 20 to 30 trillion human cells that make up your body. 100 billion of them make up your brain. And we also have in us about 10 times the number of bacteria, fungi, virus, and so forth, your microbiome. And what we're learning, I mean, you've heard me talk about this at the work we're doing at Human Longevity, is that your microbiome is extremely important to your health.
Correct.
your state of mind, how you feel, whether you're obese, whether you're skinny, a whole slew of things. And it's incredible in some of the things that we've talked about before in eating and microbiome, the connection there.
Yeah. We've talked about this before. I'm convinced that because they contain so much more genetic information than our own genome, and they're capable of rapid genetic change and rapid growth, that I and a few others think that we've actually uploaded most of our processing and decision making to our bacterial cloud.
Yeah.
Because they're actually...
I love that term you use, the bacterial cloud is sort of a additional processing capability.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me because that's where the rubber meets the road. Everything that we ingest has to come through our bacterial processing.
Yeah.
And it's a hard concept for us to get around, that bacteria could actually tell us what to do. We're basically a condominium for bacteria. And we're an incredible symbiont. And we've made a deal with these guys to teach our immune system what to do, teach our brain what to do. We know that young bacteria, when we transplant them into old mice, make the old mice young again. And we can get into that. It's really voodoo stuff.
Amazing, amazing. And we will be getting into that stuff in the Q&A. We're going to be chatting here for about another 20-25 minutes, myself and Dr. Gundry, and then we want to open it up for questions. And as I said in the materials going out here, the book that you just wrote, The Plant Paradox, that is, by the way, congratulations, #2 in the New York Times list.
Thank you very much.
That's awesome. Congratulations, and I hope those of you who have gotten the book have enjoyed it so far, and those of you who have not, I urge you to get it. Not for the theory. We're going to talk about the theory. In the back of the book, Dr. Gundry has got actually very practical what to eat, how to eat, recipes, breakfast, lunch, and dinner suggestions, which makes eating what you're proposing a lot more palatable and doable. Because the fact of the matter is, what you've identified here is that a lot of the things that we currently eat that we think of as healthy are in fact not. In fact, they're attacking us. Correct. And let's just jump into the meat of that now.
Perfect.
Because I think that's the important thing to realize. Like, at the end of the day, I want our viewers to know what the hell do we eat and what don't we want to eat and why. Because you've changed my diet 80% of what I...
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It makes it really tough to explain to people. I have to go into the entire theory of lectin. And I met this guy, Dr. Gundry, through my dear friend, Tony Robbins, who's a dear friend of ours both. So let's jump in. What do we eat, what don't we eat, and why?
Okay, plants don't like us. They were here first. They had it great. Nobody wanted to eat them. When their predators arrived, they had a problem. They couldn't run, they couldn't hide, they couldn't fight. But they're chemists, as you and I know, of incredible ability. Almost all drugs come from a plant compound. And so they use chemical warfare to keep us, their predator, from eating them. And they use lectins, which are proteins that are basically designed to hack our system in many ways. But the fundamental principle of lectins are, I like have people think of these as basically incoming guided missile attacks. And lectins like to pry apart the wall of our intestine. And most people don't realize that inside of us, the surface area of the intestines is equivalent to a tennis court in surface area, every one of us. And the wall of the intestine is only 1 cell thick. And the cells are all held together by little tight junctions, like kids playing Red Rover, Red Rover. And lectins actually flip a switch and pop these tight junctions apart. And then lectins, which are a foreign protein, get through the wall of our gut, but they also take with them, what we talk about in the book, are bacterial particles, cell walls, called lipopolysaccharides.
Right.
They're abbreviated LPSs, and
You're bringing back very ancient memories from medical school.
so I don't swear, but I call them little pieces of shit in the book because that's actually what they are. And so if you want to think about our immune system is the border patrol on the other side of our gut. And when foreign proteins, aliens, come across our border, our immune system goes, oh my gosh, the illegal aliens have crossed the border, we're under attack, we should scramble the fighter jets, we should go to threat level 5, and wherever we see any protein that looks like a lectin or a little piece of shit, we should open fire and ask questions later. The idea is to create inflammation. Yes. And inflammation makes an animal feel lousy or not thrive. And that's how plants win.
So at the end of the day, we know one of these lectins, the whole society has gone on a gluten-free diet because you have this, I've got gluten intolerance, everybody talks about gluten intolerance and so forth, and that's just one of the minor lectins, if you would.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And we don't talk about all the other lectins that potentially could be hitting you.
Right.
So why did gluten get such a special showing?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. It truly is a lectin, and there are 2 to 5% of people who clearly carry genes for gluten intolerance, for celiac disease, the extreme form of gluten intolerance. But let me just add, if you take people with celiac disease and put them on a gluten-free diet, and they're saints, and re-biopsy their intestines 2 years later, 83% of them will still have celiac disease even though they're eating gluten-free. So that actually proves that gluten is just one little piece of this puzzle. And what I try to convince people is that most people who are eating a gluten-free diet are eating a heavy lectin-laden diet.
So, give me the top 5 or 10 things that contain lectins that I used to be eating, and all of you are eating that you don't realize you're eating. So, where are lectins prevalent in the diet?
So all grains have lectins, whether they're healthy grains. One of the things that's happened to us in the last 50 years is we have actually bought hook, line, and sinker the idea of whole grain goodness.
Yeah.
We've always thrown the haul away from grains. We, believe it or not, have been trying to make bread white for 10,000 years, and only the poor people got the brown bread. The French eat white baguettes. The Italians eat white pasta. Can you imagine an Italian eating whole wheat pasta? I mean, it's just, that's crazy.
So,
because
grains.
we've been getting rid of the lectins in grains. Now, the other is beans. Beans are a modern food as well.
That pissed me off, man. I was like, I'd gone vegan, I was like being a vegetarian, and then all of a sudden, I was getting my protein from beans, I was so proud, and then boom. I mean, you're absolutely right. Beans are really heavy in lectins.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you can soak beans and get some of the lectins out, and you can cook beans and get some of the lectins out, but they're still heavy in lectins. The only way to get it out is a pressure cooker. And I was doing a podcast yesterday with a vegan chef who has a best-selling book, and she wanted me on her podcast, and she decided to go on the Plant Paradox program and to test it out.
Yeah.
And so she has been on it for about a month. And she says, okay, I'm going to start this podcast because I did this to prove you wrong, because I'm a thriving vegan and I chose vegan for lots of reasons. But she said, you're right. She said, I can't believe how much better I feel following your vegan diet. There's a vegan version in the book. There's a vegetarian version in the book. She said, you took away what I thought every vegan had to eat to be healthy. And when I took those out of my diet, she said, you're right. I hate to admit it, but I'm here on the podcast telling you were right. And this is actually the response I get from almost every human being, including myself.
So grains?
Okay, grains and beans.
And beans. And then
And American plants.
American plants. So this is interesting, right? I love this. Again, it's about logic, right? Most of us didn't evolve in America 100,000 or a million years ago. We were alive in the savannas of Africa.
Yeah, we all came from Africa.
Yeah.
And none of us from America are from America. We're from Europe, Asia, or Africa.
Yeah.
So none of us have ever encountered an American plant.
Or our genomics didn't encounter it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or our microbiome.
Or our microbiome, yeah.
Until 500 years ago, when Columbus started trade.
Well, there are the American Indians watching who probably...
But they're Asian, no offense.
over across the...
You came here about 11,000 years ago, so we're all from somewhere else. Sorry about that. And we're all originally from Africa.
Yes, agreed. So our genomics evolved for a non-American plant diet. And so what are the American plants that we are eating that we shouldn't be?
So the two beans that are peanuts and cashews, they're beans, they're not nuts, they're American. Peanuts are some of the most deadly foods ever found. The nightshade family, potatoes, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, and goji berries. Goji berries are American. They were called the wolfberry. They were taken to China in trade, and they grew extremely well. So these are all nightshades. And the sad thing is, in general, the peels and the seeds have the lectins. And Italians, as you probably know, traditionally peel and de-seed their tomatoes before you make sauce. And my mother's mother was French, and she taught my mother to always peel and de-seed a tomato before we ate them. And
because that's where the lectins are.
Because that's where the lectins are, and they were removing them.
Yeah.
The same way with peppers. You'll never open a glass jar of Italian bell peppers and see peels and seeds, because they're gone. The Southwest American Indians always char and de-seed their peppers before they grind them into chili powder or eat them. You'll never open a can of green chilies and see peels and seeds, because they've been removed.
Interesting.
So traditional cultures have dealt with lectins, and we've kind of forgotten all that.
And it's fascinating. They dealt with it not by knowing the molecular biology, but by trial and error.
Yeah, they knew how it made them feel.
Yeah.
In fact, there's the old joke that no sane individual would ever take a second bite of a jalapeno pepper. And if you think about it from a plant standpoint, the plant's going, what do I have to do to stop you eating my babies?
Yeah. So, so in the book, you talk about the, and I remember when I first met, you were so kind to spend a couple hours and made my life very easy by having these are things you can eat, and these are things you shouldn't eat, and it changed where I shop, it changed what I eat, it changed everything. Now, at the end of the day, I want to now talk about the impact it has, because the impact is on, number one, weight reduction. We'll come to that in a moment. But the second is if you've got an autoimmune disease. I mean, you have had miraculous results with people with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or polymyalgia rheumatica or a whole range of other autoimmune diseases. So can you talk about the autoimmune elements and the weight loss and then cardiac as well?
Yeah.
I mean, are those the three major categories you would say, or?
Yeah, in fact, the longer I do this now, I think Hippocrates' statement keeps ringing in my ears, and I think most of us forgot it. So Hippocrates said that all disease begins in the gut. But he said that every creature has this ability to heal itself, to have perfect health. And he called it the green life force energy. It's kind of hokey, but that's what he called it. It sounds better in Greek or Latin. And so the purpose of a physician was to identify the obstacles that was keeping the green life force energy from having perfect health in a person, and to remove those obstacles. And then the person would heal himself. And what I found, I'm a pretty good detective, is by removing things from people, they all heal themselves. So I don't heal rheumatoid arthritis. I identify what's giving them rheumatoid arthritis, get it out of their diet, and then they heal themselves. Hippocrates was right.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was speaking to an infectious physician, one of the top ID doctors here in LA, and we were talking about the notion that his belief is that all autoimmune diseases, all rheumatoid type diseases actually begin through an infectious process. It's your body having your immune system basically identifying some kind of a alien protein, maybe with part of your molecular structure, and turning on an immune cell that attacks it, and then when the infection's gone, you still keep attacking yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea. We know that there's a lot of people who we can trace the beginning of their autoimmune disease to an infection, a viral gastroenteritis, stomach flu. We can trace it to somebody getting a ton of antibiotics and killing off their microbiome. Certainly, we've seen people with a stressful encounter. I remember one woman very clearly in Santa Barbara. Her rheumatoid arthritis started a week after her mother's sudden death when she was about 13 years of age. She remembers it vividly, and now she doesn't have it anymore, but what happened was she had leaky gut from that shock. And one thing I like to use as an example, we know that marathon runners, elite marathon runners, get a profound leaky gut. And you actually see marathon runners towards the end of a race have bloody diarrhea as they near the finish line. And our immune system in marathon running takes this tremendous hit for about 2 weeks, and the gut becomes permeable. But so I think Hippocrates is right that it starts in the gut. Now, whether a bacteria gets through, whether a lectin gets through, whether both accomplish it. Lectins are interesting because they are proteins, and proteins that look a lot like other proteins in our body, and it's called molecular mimicry. And the idea is when your immune system is activated, it doesn't want to make a mistake, and it would rather shoot first and ask questions later. So imagine your fighter jets are scrambled and they come across your thyroid gland, and there's lectins or other proteins that look like lectins, and your immune system says, oh my gosh, this poor woman, her thyroid's full of lectins and we should kill them. And it's amazing the number of people with Hashimoto's thyroiditis that it actually has come from their gut, whether it's permeability.
And what you've shown is if you change your diet, you can calm your immune system down in that regard.
Correct.
And how fast can you do that?
Well, I was naive early on that I thought it could be done in a couple of weeks. It takes a while, primarily because you have to change your microbiome. The microbiome can change fairly rapidly, but then you have to go about sealing the wall of your gut. We need to think of our microbiome as this tropical rainforest, which is an incredible ecosystem in and of itself. There's 10,000 different denizens living in there, and they compete for space and they compete for food. And so it's an incredible ecosystem. And one, for instance, round of antibiotics, as you and I know, will wipe out this ecosystem.
Yep.
And it may take 2 years to get this ecosystem back to its complexity. So it can take 3 months, 6 months. I've seen it take as long as a year, but usually 3 to 6 months. And last fall, I had the honor of giving a paper at the International Microbiome meeting in Paris at the Pasteur Institute of 78 patients with marker-proven autoimmune diseases who, following this program, became marker negative within the year and stayed marker negative as long as they followed the program.
So I'd like to, before we open up for questions, let's walk people through what the program looks like.
Sure.
And again, all of that is in detail in the book, which again I commend to you. But just what's it feel like? How do you start it?
Yeah. So the rule number one is the most important rule. It's what you don't eat that's important, and if you remember that, we'll be okay. Number two rule is you are what you eat, but we've forgotten that you are what the thing you're eating ate. And so, for instance, if a cow is fed corn and beans, that cow is basically an ear of corn with meat on it. A chicken that's fed corn is no longer a chicken. It's an ear of corn with feathers. And it's amazing the number of people that I've seen that it was the organic free-range chicken that was the cause of their lupus. And when we took their organic free-range chicken away from them, their lupus went away.
So let's drill down, because that was a fascinating insight to me. At the end of the day, when you're eating pasture-raised beef or free-range chicken, that doesn't guarantee you anything.
Correct, because the federal government allowed the law to be changed that a free-range chicken can be kept in a warehouse its entire life, fed corn and grains and soybeans, and never has to be let outside. And as long as you open a door to the outside for 5 minutes every 24 hours. That's the law.
I mean, it's such crazy bullshit that it drives me nuts, right? So in other words, the chicken has the potential option of going out and being free in a range.
For 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes. So,
and of course, it's crammed in there with 100,000 other chickens, and it can't get to the door.
So what kind of chicken and beef do you need to be eating? What's the defined class that actually meets the standards that you support?
So find a farmer that pasture raises their chicken. And I go to a farmer's market and say, what do you feed your chickens? And the answer is nothing. They're insectivores. They work for me. They go out and eat bugs. They eat, grass, but they're bug eaters. And so all they actually need is a little scratch, which is not corn, actually little pieces of pebbles to grind in their gizzard. Mm-hmm. But that's what chickens are supposed to eat. Now, you got to be careful with pasture or grass-fed beef, because the law got changed because every cow spends a few days at least on grass. So you can actually legitimately call something in your supermarket grass-fed beef, even if it spent a minimum amount of time eating grass, because it was grass-fed at some time in its life.
Right.
So you got to find grass-fed and grass-finished.
Yeah.
Now, I've stopped eating beef and pork and lamb for reasons you'll see in the book, and it's pretty wild, and we won't go into that today. But wild fish, wild shellfish, pastured chicken are perfectly safe. But one of the things that I get into in the book, and I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and we have made protein the almighty god of nutrition. And one of the things that makes longevity happen in the blue zones, those are the people with the longest lives, they have impressive animal protein restriction. Animal protein is a minimal part of their diet. And I think that's actually one of the real keys if we want to have profound longevity, and we can talk about more about that.
Yeah.
And it hurts me to say that because I grew up in Omaha.
And it's interesting, right? We both know of individuals who go on caloric restriction diets to lengthen their lives. And when you're only getting 1,200 calories versus 3,000, every calorie you take in is something like I want that calorie. You become very specific of what calories you take in. And you taught me something about what they've been doing that's absolutely wrong.
Yeah, it's the St. Louis University has a long ongoing study of the Calorie Restriction Society. And like Peter says, these are folks who really restrict their calories about 35% of normal. And they're very thin and they're very cold, but they don't age rapidly. But they have there's a insulin-like growth factor that I measure in all my patients every 3 months, and it's a very good marker of how fast or slow we're aging. And it's a pretty good stand-in for whether mTOR is activated or is quiescent. So they've studied these calorie restriction folks, and they've been fascinated that their insulin-like growth factors, which should be incredibly low, are really just about normal of everybody else. And so they also study vegans. And so they asked, and vegans carry very low insulin-like growth factors. So they asked some of the Calorie Restrictions Society folks to eat vegan, but keep their calories restricted, but eliminate animal protein. Right. And like you say, these guys love every last calorie, and so they tend to eat a lot of their calories as animal protein, because if you're not going to get much, you might as well enjoy it.
Yep.
So when they did that, then their insulin-like growth factors plummeted, even below what the vegans were doing. And so that study, and also a couple of studies in long-term rhesus monkeys, which also implicates that it's the protein load that really makes the long-term difference in longevity. Mm-hmm. And again, it breaks my heart, but I think it's true.
You take supplements.
Yes, I do.
I do as well. My dear friend Ray Kurzweil does too. His wife says Ray has a superpower, his ability to swallow handfuls of pills in one drink. What are the key, most important supplements that you recommend to people right now?
So,
and by the way, you have all this information on your Gundry MD website as well.
Right.
Yeah.
As you know, I used to think supplements made expensive urine. I really did. The pleasure my patients have given to me, and I dedicated this book to my patients who really have taught me everything I know or made me find out everything I know, mm-hmm. is that we can look at people taking a supplement or not taking a supplement, and we can see biomarkers that are measurable and that get improved, and then we can take that supplement away, or they'll forget to take it, and we can see that biomarker gets worse. So one of the things we should all be taking is huge amounts of polyphenols. Right. Now, again, we're designed to interact with plant compounds, particularly compounds in dark berries. We actually should have a lot of the polyphenols in coffee. Chocolate has a fantastic polyphenol, green tea. So the polyphenols are primarily in the coating of the seeds or in the peel of the seeds, and also the seed itself. But unfortunately, most of our fruit now has been bred for sugar content. Mm-hmm. So most of our modern fruit is candy, unfortunately.
Yeah. And by the way, you recommend not eating fruits throughout the year, maybe somewhat during the summer.
Right.
But I've eliminated 95% of the fruit in my diet. I'll still eat a few blackberries and blueberries, but that's about it.
Yeah. Years ago, in June in the Santa Barbara Farmers Market, I was putting some peaches in a bag, and my wife says, "Hey, aren't you the guy that says don't eat fruit?" And I said, yeah, but it's summer now, we can eat fruit. And she said, "I'll tell you, smart guy, why don't we give up fruit this summer and let's see what happens?" And I said, "Oh, come on, come on." And she said, "No, let's do it." So we both gave up fruit. I lost 8 pounds that summer. We didn't change anything else, and she lost 6 pounds.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it is sugar.
Yeah, we use fruit to fatten up for the winter. All great apes only gain weight during fruit season. Yeah. They only gain weight during fruit season.
Just as a reminder, please post your questions for Dr. Gundry. We're going to go to Q&A in just a minute from my colleague here, Marissa. So
polyphenols are great. The other thing we don't...
Other supplements, right?
Yeah, the other thing we don't get is a lot of plant-based compounds, green compounds, which are phytochemicals. Our ancestors, even actually the Kalahari Bushmen, have been studied, and they eat 250 different plant species on a rotating basis throughout the year. And they interact with all those phytochemicals, and those phytochemicals change their bacteria genome, and those phytochemicals communicate to our genome. If we really think eating an organic diet and visiting the farmer's market, we can interact with 250 different plant species. I got oceanfront property in Palm Springs to sell you. It can't be done. So we've got to get those back in our diet. And the third thing that people have to get back in their diet is what are called prebiotics. Now, most people have heard of probiotics. Sure. Those are the bacteria. But the bacteria have to have something to eat. And these guys thrive on complex starches, oligosaccharides, that they eat and reproduce. And the cool thing is that these sorts of sugar molecules we can't digest. And the other cool thing is the obesogenic bacteria can't digest these complex sugar molecules.
So what are some examples there?
So one of the most famous ones is glucomannan or konjac root. There's a number of very good products on the market. I'll give a shout out to Miracle Noodles. Jonathan Karp, MD from the LA area, makes Miracle Noodles. They're noodles or rice that are made out of the konjac root, and bugs love this stuff. Inulin, which is a fructoooligosaccharide, is also a great thing. You can use acacia powder, you can use psyllium. Psyllium husks are a fermentable fiber. Mm-hmm. In terms of vegetables, Jerusalem artichokes, sometimes sunchokes, are fantastic. Taro root is wonderful. My wife and I had some taro root chips last night, as a matter of fact. Sweet potatoes are fine. But they're there as a delivery device to get olive oil into your mouth.
Yes.
And olive oil has some of the best polyphenols of all time.
Do you know, since we first met, I've been doing shots of olive oil every night. Just, probably not a shot glass, actually a glass of olive oil. So how much olive oil do you think I should be taking? Well, as a good Greek.
Yeah. Well, as you know, on Crete, the average consumption of olive oil is 1 liter per week. And that's 12 tablespoons a day. Mm-hmm. And so one of my favorite sayings is the only purpose of food is to get olive oil into your mouth.
I've heard that.
And it's really interesting. The Spanish did a really cool study that I know you're aware of, where they took 65-year-old people and they put them on a Mediterranean diet. And the one group had to use 1 liter of olive oil per week for 5 years. And they actually had to come and get the olive oil dispensed to them once a week. They had to bring the empty one back. The second group had to have the equivalent amount of raw walnuts. And the third group had a low-fat Mediterranean diet. And the original study was for memory. So at the end of 5 years, the olive oil group had preserved memory. It actually improved over baseline. The walnut group had preserved memory, but it was the same as baseline. And the low-fat diet group had diminished memory. But the really cool part of the study, which just got published a few months ago, is that the women in the olive oil group had a 67% less incidence of breast cancer than the other two groups. So, yeah, drink your olive oil.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. People think of fats as something to avoid. In fact, fats are probably one of the most important parts of your diet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so avocados and olive oil have made a big appearance in my life in the last 6 months.
Yeah, the Greeks do it. The Sardinians use about 1 liter of olive oil.
It's interesting, right? Because you can actually go and study what the blue zone populations eat. And what do you find there? These are the populations around the world that have 100 years old as a normal occurrence in all the villages.
So one of the interesting things about these blue zones is that they actually have wildly different diets. For instance, the Cretes and the Sardinians, two of the blue zones, use huge amounts of olive oil. And that is a huge part of their diet. The Okinawans, on the other hand, eat very little fat, but 80% of their diet is a purple sweet potato. There's some fascinating groups of people called the Kitabins that really changed my thought on carbohydrates, who eat about 60% of their diet is taro root. And these guys live into their 90s and they smoke like fiends, but there's never been a case of heart disease, there's never been a case of lung cancer. So here's these two groups of people. One eats huge amounts of what appear to be carbohydrates, the other group eats huge amounts of fat, and yet they both live a long time. What I went back to my research at Yale, and gorillas eat 16 pounds of leaves every day, but they don't absorb those calories as carbohydrates. The bacteria actually eat those leaves and produce fat. They produce primarily short chain and medium chain fatty acids. So the gorilla absorbs a 60% fat diet.
Interesting. So I have to share something that was a really important takeaway that you gave me. So at the end of the day, if you're trying to gain muscle, I bet you, if you're a vegan, someone's saying, "Oh, if you want to gain muscle, come on, get some good meat into you. Go and eat, go get a good steak or something." And then you shared a visual insight for me that was like, "Oh my God, you're right." Can you share that with everybody?
Yeah, I mean, a gorilla eats no meat. A gorilla has more muscle than you and I could ever possibly
They're plant
imagine.
eaters.
They're plant eaters. A horse eats grass. He's not chewing on burgers. He has more muscle than you'll ever have. All the largest animals on Earth, all the most muscular animals on Earth are plant eaters.
Yeah, amazing.
And interestingly enough, the great carnivores, like lions and tigers, actually eat the bellies of the animals, which actually contains plant material and fat. And lions will always leave the hindquarters and the legs because it's not worth it for them to eat. They want the abdominal content.
Okay, one last question, we'll go to Q&A here. Autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. If someone comes to you with RA, as an example, what is your advice to them? Get on this diet?
Correct.
And how quickly will they start to see potentially a change?
Yeah, so, if you're on biologics for any of the autoimmune diseases, don't take away that you should stop them tomorrow and start this. What you do want to do is you want to repair your gut, and more importantly, you want to stop the sieve that you've got. And the best analogy I can have for you is that you're in a boat and the boat has holes in it. And there's two strategies here to keep the boat afloat. You can start bailing water. And if the holes are big enough, you're going to need a bigger and bigger bucket, and eventually you're not going to be able to keep up and you'll sink. The other strategy is to plug the holes. And what I think I do by taking lectins away, which are the hole makers, is allow you to plug your holes, and then you don't need to bail. You don't take in water. So the more you follow these principles, it's what you don't eat that's important. It's not so much what I tell you to eat. Eat like it's 9,999 years ago. And if you keep that in mind, we ate leaves and tubers, and we ate some shellfish, and we ate some fish, and we ate wild animals, but they were primarily at that time fatty wild animals, woolly mammoths. That's actually how we did. So we did not eat grains, we did not eat beans, we did not eat potatoes, we did not eat tomatoes.
Interesting. And then will you actually see changes in your genetic markers on RA after a period of time?
Well, yeah, we definitely see the rheumatoid factor goes to normal. We see the anti-CCP3 go to normal. You'll still have people, there's clearly a genetic component for propensity to these things, but you can stop that from being expressed. Right. And that's really, as you and I know, epigenomics is really the key. It's not so much the genes you're dealt, it's whether you turn them
whether you
off
express
or on.
them or not.
Right?
Amazing. All right, Marissa, let's jump into our beloved audience here.
Fabulous. Thanks for the discussion so far. So the first question is around healthy proteins, and several similar questions. One, what are the most healthy proteins? What vegetarian protein source do you suggest? And then overall views on eating beef.
So there's plenty of protein in plant leaves. Again, we've not been taught that because it goes against really our commerce. There's plenty of protein in leaves. I take care of a lot of vegetarians and vegans who have been brainwashed to think they have to get protein from grains or beans. Grains are a horrible source of protein. It's really a very small part of a grain. Beans are a better source, but you certainly don't need beans. Humans 10,000 years ago were 10 feet tall, men and women. And the amazing thing is our brain was 15% bigger than it is today. We shrunk dramatically when we were exposed to healthy plant proteins of grains and beans. Of the plant proteins, if you really want a grain-like thing, hemp is quite frankly the safest. And the more we can encourage hemp growing in this country, the better from my point of view. Hemp has a lot of miraculous properties that we're only now beginning to realize. So hemp protein is great for you. Stay away from pea protein. Peas have lectins, and I see a lot of vegetarians who are eating their healthy pea protein, and I think that's a mistake. Now, in terms of beef, beef and pork and lamb have a sugar molecule called New5GC that promotes an autoimmune response in humans who eat them, and we actually can prove that we attack the inside of our blood vessels. And cancer cells, tumors, use 5-NEU-GC to evade the immune system and actually to stimulate a growth factor called VEGF to grow blood vessels towards them. Humans have New5AC, A instead of G, which is incredibly close, but it's actually one of the things that differentiates us from other species. Chicken has New5AC, fish and shellfish have New5AC, so we don't react immunologically to chicken and shellfish and fish. So as much as I'm a Nebraska farm boy, beef is mischievous. And so if you're going to have it, have grass-fed, but just do it as a special treat, if any.
Along those lines, you educated me that it turns out that I'm lactose intolerant and that not all lactose is made the same. And could you actually share, I mean, I found this absolutely fascinating that out there in the world, there are two different types of cows. One is okay and the other one should be avoided.
Yeah, so the original cow there's a protein in milk called casein A2, and the other protein in milk is whey. And about 2,000 years ago, northern European cows suffered a spontaneous genetic mutation.
As we do.
As we do. And they started making casein A1. Now, casein A1 is a very interesting lectin-like protein that has some very strong correlation to attacking the beta cell of the pancreas. And I and others are convinced that a lot of type 1 diabetes can directly be traced to casein A1. So casein A1 cows are hardier and they give more milk. So that almost all cows in the world are now the wrong breed of cow. They're the Holstein cow, the black and white cow. And so their milk contains casein A1. Guernsey cows, Swiss brown cows, Belgian blue cows are casein A2. All goats and all sheep are casein A2. So it's very interesting. A lot of people who think they're lactose intolerant, what I've found is they're actually casein A1 intolerant, because a great number of them can have goat's milk and not react, even though there's plenty of lactose in goat's milk. And one of the eye-openers for me early on was people who were lactose intolerant would go to Italy and they'd have the gelato and come back and say, I love going to Italy because there's no lactose in their gelato. And I said, well, yes, of course there is. They said, well, no, because I can have all the gelato I want and I don't react. And I'm lactose intolerant. I said, no. It turns out casein A2 cows are in Italy, France, and Switzerland. So what you thought was a lactose intolerant was casein A1. And if people have what they think is a milk intolerance, or that milk gives them mucus, or that I'll have people tell me that they're lactose intolerant and they can't have cheese. Well, there's no lactose in cheese, but the cheese gives them mucus. The mucus is actually our protection against the casein A1 lectin, and we make mucus to trap those lectins.
Fascinating. Next question, Marissa.
Fun one from Francis. Can we design nanotech to allow us to eat anything and still remain healthy and slim?
You want to take that one?
Sure. So Francis, at the end of the day, of course, I mean, the promise of nanotechnology is to allow you to pretty much do anything. I mean, our bodies are nano machines. We start from a set of 3.2 billion nucleotides, the data set, and we manufacture a cell in the human zygote, and then replicate that and specialize that to somewhere on the order of 30 trillion of them that make up your body. The vision of nanotechnology, as originally portrayed by Eric Drexler and continued by folks like Ray Kurzweil and others, is that we're going to use these kinds of nanomachines who go in and can recognize, if you would, lectins and destroy them on the spot. But the fact of the matter is, once we have that level of technology, so much more happens in the world that you'll forget about that as this small fringe benefit as you blast off on your diamondoid spaceship towards your space colony. So yeah, but I guess the question is, can we in fact avoid, can we eat things and avoid having the lectins bother us? And in fact, we don't have to wait for nanotechnology. I use a product you have called Lectin Shields right now. Talk about that 1 second.
Yeah, so we know that lectins have specific targets. They're sugar molecules. And we even know what sugar molecules lectins are particularly designed to be attracted to. So I formulated a compound that has about 8 known lectin desirable sugar molecules that bind lectins. And can you do anything you want if you take it? I didn't design it for that, but it's certainly protective. I feel like Bill Murray on Groundhog Day. We could do anything we want. But I've taken it to Italy and eaten pasta and potatoes and not suffered the normal consequences of blowing up like a toad. But so yeah, it's possible to bind lectins, and I try to eat a lot of lectin binding compounds, and those compounds have lots of inulin already in them. So for example, radicchio has a lot of inulin in it. Chicory, endive has a lot of inulin in it. And it's really interesting looking at what Italians put in their salads, because Italians traditionally have used lots of inulin containing compounds. And right from the get-go, they're absorbing lectins, number one, and they're also empowering their bacteria. And the thing I talk about in the book, one of the things that's really changed is our bacteria is really kind of our defensive front floor. And they're there as the initial line of defense against lectins. There are bacteria that love gluten, for instance. And one of the interesting things is, if you go gluten-free, your bacteria that love gluten leave because they have nothing to eat. And so if you're not even necessarily gluten sensitive and then you re-eat gluten, you will probably feel the gluten lectin because the bacteria have gone. It's one of the interesting side effects of a gluten-free diet.
Marissa.
This next one is from Hunter. Will there be a healing crisis in the initial phase of the plant paradox diets as the microbiome rebalances and certain bacteria die off?
In the literature of detoxing, we talk about that. Quite frankly, I haven't seen it in my own practice, and I've been taking care of up to 10,000 people now. It's really not reported. We do see some change in bowel habits initially, but we don't see people getting worse and then getting better. They usually always get better. How's that?
That's great. This next one is from Neil. We now live longer than ever. If so, what role did our ancient natural diet play in contributing to a lifespan that was only a fraction of what it is today?
Well, this is everybody's favorite question in longevity, because lifespan, the oldest people have always lived a very, very long time. Ben Franklin lived into his mid-90s in actually very good health. What's happened to us in 1900, life expectancy was about 40 years. And now we'll be in our mid-80s. What's happened is we've beat the main cause of mortality, which was infectious diseases and accidents. And those now, childbirth and infant death were really two of the main contributors to a shortened lifespan. And so people think that, well, we only lived till we were 40 back in 1900. No, that was the average lifespan because the great majority of us died off very young. But the old people have always been very old. And what we're now seeing is, unfortunately, we have a long lifespan, but we have a horrible health span. And if you actually look at the number of diseases that a 55-year-old currently has and compare them to their parents at the parents' age of 55, the current 55-year-old is actually sicker than his parents. And we're propping people up with fantastic technologies that unfortunately I was part of, and I'm proud of keeping people alive with heart surgery. But the point is, you shouldn't need these things. You know, Thomas Edison said the doctor of the future will give no medication. And what we need to do is have an increased health span. We need to, there's a wonderful Japanese researcher that I quote in the book, and I often get it wrong, so you'll forgive me, but his quote is, "Eat right, stay fit, live long, die quick." And if you think about it, that's exactly what all of us want. You want to, I sign my books, Die Young at a very old age, because that's what we want. I don't want to live in a nursing home being wheeled around in a wheelchair. But, you know, I want to be, you know, running my dogs at 100 or 105. Incidentally, the lady who started my first book and who's mentioned in this book, Edith Murray, just celebrated her 105th birthday on May 5th. And she still walks in to see me with her 2-inch heels, dressed to the nine, hair and makeup, and she's smart as a whip. So there is a wonderful future. She changed her diet at the age of 20, listening to a great nutritionist by the name of Gaylord Hauser. And I started taking care of her when she was 90, because she said I talked just like Gaylord Hauser. And I've read his books, and I could have written his books. This guy was so far ahead of his time. He basically said, go home, throw all white food out of your pantry, and never eat a white food again. And she believed him. 105.
Amazing. This next one is from Julie and several others. So if you do have to take antibiotics, what can you do to offset some of those negative effects?
Yeah, we have to realize that swallowing antibiotics is like throwing napalm in your rainforest. If you have to take antibiotics, and this is something you really have to struggle with your physician. These are not candy, these are not toys. Broad spectrum antibiotics have just decimated us in so many ways. So absolutely take probiotics, but take probiotics from spore-forming bacteria. My favorite is what's called BC30. It's made by a company called Gluten. It's in Vital Reds. If you don't want to get Vital Reds, Schiff licenses it. It's called, let's see if I can remember the name of it, Intensive Bowel Support, but Schiff makes it. A Digestive Advantage is the name of it. So spores get through the acid in your stomach. Quite frankly, a great number of probiotics don't make it past the acid in your stomach. So keep taking probiotics while you're taking antibiotics, and then keep giving those bugs fertilizer, and those are the prebiotics that we talked about earlier. So you're going to kill off your bugs, but just keep reseeding them.
Yep.
This next one comes from Alex. What is a practical and easy way to test the condition of your gut?
Boy, that's a really good question. There's some really cool blood tests that we can do that really aren't available to everybody, although insurance does cover them. Let's put it this way. If you notice that after you eat, your belly swells up a little bit, if you're either constipated or your stools are looser than normal, one of my favorite examples is we're the only animal that uses toilet paper. And I want you to let that sink in for a second. Many of my patients come back to me and say, I don't know how to mention this, but I wipe and there's nothing there anymore, and I used to wipe a lot, and is that weird? And I said, no, you've now become a normal animal. And it was one of the eye-openers for me when I started with this, because, you know, I could go through a half a roll, and all of a sudden one day I said, well, that's funny, there's nothing here to do, and so if there's something to wipe, your gut isn't right. Ooh, I like that. Write that down. How's that?
This next one is from Jim. Rice is a staple food in Asia. What do you suggest?
So 4 billion people use rice as their staple. 4 billion people take the hull off of brown rice and eat it white. That ought to tell you something. The hull contains most of the lectins. So if you're going to eat rice, eat it white, but I'd like you to do one other thing. After you cook it, put it in the refrigerator, let it cool, and then the next day or later that day, bring it out and reheat it. The cooling will turn that rice into a resistant starch, which will resist digestion, and you won't get the big sugar spike, and the friendly bugs in your gut will actually enjoy it more. So of the grains, traditional grains, rice is the safest, but eat it white. And the other two grains that don't have lectins are the ancient grains millet and sorghum. And we've got some sorghum and millet recipes in the book. I highly recommend them. They are a non-hull grain. You can even get sorghum popcorn. It's great.
Cool. This next one is from Gerhard. How do the various methods of cooking preparations, from cooking, raw, fermented, how do those come in play, and how should folks think about that?
We have to remember that up until very recently, we had no methods of food preservation. We had no refrigerators, we had no storage systems. So everything we gathered actually rotted. And fermentation, we forget, is actually the natural process of what happened to most of our foods. And this was actually utilized because we let bacteria do a lot of the work in eating lectins for us. And that's why traditionally breads were raised with yeast or with sourdough, which has both yeast and bacteria. And the yeast and the bacteria actually eat a lot of the gluten and a lot of the lectins in grains. So when we think about traditional preparation methods, these were actually pretty good ways to reducing lectin content. But one of the things that really happened to make us human is cooking actually broke down cell walls and also helped destroy lectins. There's an interesting paper out of China that vegetarians who eat a lot of raw vegetables have the highest incidence of Parkinson's disease among Chinese. And we could go into why I think that is, but I think we have to be, I eat a lot of raw vegetables, don't get me wrong, but I think we do have to be cautious that those are the plant in their most potent form in terms of lectins. Something to think about.
This one's from Christina. What organic fruits are not considered candy that I should be eating this summer for polyphenols?
So in my book, what I'd like you to do is you take that juicer, which I would ordinarily tell you to throw in the trash, but you buy all those nice organic fruits, particularly the berries, and you put them in your juicer and you juice them, and then you throw the juice away. I really mean that. And you take the pulp and then you put the pulp in, for instance, coconut yogurt is a great way to have it. Put it in a smoothie with coconut milk. Get rid of the sugar. Sugar is lethal. Fructose is so dangerous. You'll see in the book that it's a great way to kill your kidneys. It's a great way to make cholesterol. I mean it. We just give fruit the boot. But use your juicer, and we'll show you how to do it in the book.
Similarly, this one's from Susan. She's looking for tips or hints to keep the carb-addicted obese person on track.
So the way to get this, we have a whole chapter called Chapter 10, Dr. Gundry's Plant Paradox Intensive Care Unit. And what you have to do is you have to realize that you're carb addicted because your mitochondria, the little energy organelles in all of your cells, are actually dysfunctional, and they're constantly having to have sugar because they think they need it. In fact, what they really need is another source of fuel, and that fuel is ketones. And I know many people have heard about getting into ketosis. Dr. Adkins thought everybody should get into ketosis. What he didn't know is that eating protein will actually keep you from being in ketosis, because we convert protein into sugar on us. It's called gluconeogenesis. So have some MCT oil or some coconut oil. Take a tablespoon 2 or 3 times a day, particularly when you're in those weak moments that you're getting kind of the Atkins flu or the low carb flu. A tablespoon of coconut oil or MCT oil is just the thing to get you going again.
This next one is for M. Any suggestions for middle-aged women with hypothyroidism?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen, there is a huge outbreak of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, primarily from what we've talked about before, but there's a mini epidemic of hypothyroidism because everybody has switched over to sea salt, and sea salt doesn't have any iodine in it. One of the only smart things the federal government ever did in the early 1900s is mandate putting iodine in salt. Because we actually had such an epidemic of hypothyroidism in the early 1900s that as many as 4 million Americans died of hypothyroidism. And that mandated iodine. So you can get iodized sea salt. If not, go just get regular Morton salt, or do what I do. I go to Trader Joe's and I buy spirulina tablets. They're organic algae, and I take about 4 500 milligram spirulinas a day, and it's plenty of iodine. And it's amazing to me the number of women particularly who are just kind of marginally hypothyroid. We put them back on iodized salt or have them get their spirulina, and it's all it takes to start making thyroid again.
One of my favorite parts of the book here is in the back. It's the sample meal plans, which you again, it's how do you make living this particular diet easier, right? So one of the things you have here is your green smoothies. What do you put in your green smoothies?
So a wonderful woman, Irina from Catalyst Cuisine, is a young woman in Santa Barbara who cured herself of rheumatoid arthritis by following my program, and she's a professional chef. So she always made this smoothie, and I actually had her make the first 3 days of our plan called the Kickstart Cleanse. And her smoothie is spectacular, and my wife whips it every morning. So you take basically a handful of organic spinach, you chop about a half a head of romaine lettuce, you put a half an avocado, you squeeze a half a lemon, you take some vanilla sweet leaf stevia drops and put that in there, and a little water and ice cubes, and blend it. Now, quite frankly, I put in my Vital Reds, my Primal Plants, and my Prebio Thrive, and she does too. And we even have a recipe for that in there. But this gets you through the day. It gets you tons of greens. It gets you great fats. If you want to throw in some coconut oil or MCT oil, particularly if you have insulin resistance or diabetes, it's a great way to start your day.
Great, thank you.
This next one is from Philo. What is most important to eat to maximize testosterone production?
It's not what you eat to maximize testosterone production, it's what you don't eat. I can't tell you the number of men I see with low T, and when I take away their sugars and I take away their large portions of protein, that their testosterone goes through the roof. Sugar suppresses testosterone production. And it's been so enlightening to me to see people that we get off of their sugars, off of their simple carbohydrates, their breads, their pastas, their potatoes, and their testosterone comes up naturally. I take all men off of testosterone replacement. The FDA is so afraid of testosterone replacement that there's a black box warning for it. You can make plenty of testosterone, you just have to be sugar-free and cut your meat protein. Exactly the opposite of what we thought.
This one is from Michael. Is there a better or acceptable type of alcohol?
Yeah. So,
Thanks for asking that, Michael.
yeah, I appreciate that. If you don't drink, don't start. If you do drink, I think red wine is probably the best of the alcoholic beverages because it gives you a pretty doggone good dose of a lot of plant polyphenols. The most famous one is resveratrol, but quercetin or quercetin is another great compound. Also, almost all red wine has been aged in wood, and it picks up the polyphenols in wood. That being said, there's an interesting paper out of France, of course, that champagne and the polyphenols in champagne is suggestive of lessening Alzheimer's in women. My wife likes to hear that because she actually prefers champagne over red wine. If you're going to drink white wine, make sure it's been aged in wood because you'll get the polyphenols from the wood. If you're going to do straight alcohol, use a darker alcohol that's been aged in wood. So the bourbons, the scotch have all been aged in wood. Try to stay away from the white alcohols, the clear ones like vodka. Dark tequila would be fine. So gin actually is okay because it has a juniper berry, which is a really cool polyphenol. So.
This next one is from Larry. How does the plant paradox diet work with type 2 diabetics?
Well, it'll make your type 2 diabetes go away, and if it doesn't, then you're not following it. And I hate to sound like a jerk, but we have never seen a type 2 diabetic get rid of diabetes by following this program. In fact, just yesterday, a 62-year-old woman with horrible hemoglobin A1Cs up in the 7.5s. It's now 6 months. She's down 40 pounds. She's off of her insulin. She's off of her metformin. And her hemoglobin A1C yesterday was 5.4, which is absolutely normal. She's not a diabetic anymore.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Cheryl wants to know, what are the specific blood panels that you order for your patients?
So what I use a company out of the Bay Area called Singulex. They're available in all 50 states. It sounds like singularity. Singulex. There's a number of good panels out there. One is True Health out of Richmond, Virginia. There's another one, Salvio, which is a new one out of the Mayo Clinic. The Cleveland Heart Labs have a good program, and the Boston Heart Labs have a good program. I also use Vibrant America for all my autoimmune testing. These are available. Your physician can order them. In general, Medicare pays for them. Most insurance pays for them. There may be some co-pays, so it's not a blanket statement. But they're payable tests.
Jackie would like for you to address Vital Reds.
Fabulous stuff. So what I wanted to do is, I love fruit, believe me. We're designed to love fruit. But I wanted to get all the benefits of polyphenols without all the sugar. I basically wanted to have a juicer in everybody's home that you could just eat the pulp. So when I invented Vital Reds, I wanted to get all the polyphenols that you would get in the skins and the seeds, but get rid of the sugar. I also wanted to get BC30, that probiotic that I told you about, into everybody. So BC30's in it. And then there's a pretty nice dose of B vitamins in them. We're amazingly deficient in B vitamins. I measure B vitamins on everybody, and it's been striking to see how deficient people are. So Vital Reds are just an easy way of getting polyphenols into you every day.
You also make a pitch for large doses of vitamin D.
Yes. We are profoundly deficient in vitamin D in this country. About 80% of Southern Californians are deficient in vitamin D. We use sunscreen, which is one of the most poisonous stuff you'll read in the book. Take 5,000 international units of vitamin D3. Dr. Hollick from Boston University, the world's expert on vitamin D, has only seen one case of vitamin D toxicity in his life, and that was a physician who unknowingly from a compounding pharmacy was taking 1 million international units a day for 6 months. So I don't recommend 1 million international units.
But what do you take vitamin D wise?
So I take 5,000, but if I feel like I'm catching something, if I got a scratchy throat, or believe it or not, I take 150,000 international units 3 days in a row, and I take 8,000 milligrams of vitamin C. So what I do is take 5,000 of vitamin D. Yeah, 5,000 of vitamin D in the morning, 5,000 midday, and 50,000 before I go to bed. 3 days in a row. It knocks out viruses. It's incredibly impressive. Now, you don't keep doing that the rest of your life, but interestingly, most people with autoimmune disease have profoundly low vitamin D levels. And I've had to use 30, 40,000 international units a day for months at a time to get their vitamin D level up.
Wow.
The important thing that appears is that vitamin D, number one, it's a hormone, it's not a vitamin. It's essential to make the stem cells in our gut that replace our gut wall grow. And without vitamin D, these guys just sit there. So if you've got a damaged gut, you need vitamin D to make these stem cells grow. And it's been very impressive to me when all these people with autoimmune disease walked through my door, that one of the things that jumped out from their labs was a low vitamin D level.
Robert's wanting to know if you are doing any live or seminar training for health practitioners anytime soon.
I do have docs that come and shadow me for a few days or a week. I'm welcome to have anybody come. It's very difficult to get a traditionally trained doctor to embark on this. We're trained to get people in and out the door every 10 minutes and write them some prescriptions. And my initial visit with anyone is an hour, and anyone who's been to my office knows if it's going to take longer than that, it's going to take longer than that. And then my subsequent visits are a half an hour. So when I decided to do this, instead of being a heart surgeon, my wife still calls it Black Friday, because you don't make a lot of money doing this compared to heart surgery. But you sure empower people to take back their health. And all of us went into medicine, hopefully, to,
Change,
to give people health. That's why we did it. Most of us lost sight of that somewhere along the line, but yeah, anyone, I'm happy to have you. Come on by.
So we're closing out the end of our 90 minutes, and Stephen, thank you so much. I mean, you really have changed the way I think about what I eat, and empowered me in that regard. Right at the end of the day, there's so many different diets, and I believe that the logical aspect of what you write about is going back again fundamentally to what our body evolved for. I mean, people have to understand, we actually evolved relatively slowly on a genetic level. And if you take a human from 10,000 years ago and they were born and raised today, they could go to MIT or Harvard like you and I can. It's not like they
might do better.
They might do better. But in other words, we change technologically, we change culturally, but our genomics, our evolutionary biology changes relatively slowly. And so what we're evolved to eat today is principally what we evolved to eat hundreds of thousands, and even in our ape ancestors millions of years ago. So I just found what you wrote to make a huge amount of logical sense, to the point where it has changed what I eat, how I think about food. So an honor and a pleasure. Please, if no other reason to getting this book, because you've learned a lot here, and you put out great YouTube videos. I think just the diet plans in the back of the book and what supplements to get is worth it. And I think we need to get you from number 2 on the New York Times list to number 1. And again, to get access to Steve and Dr. Gundry's products and services, GundryMD.com is his website. Stephen, an honor, a pleasure.
A pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. So happy that Tony introduced us.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony.
Yes. See you guys. And those of you who are part of the Abundance 360 team here, we're going to be online for our next webinar is with Dr. Louis Rosenberg from Unanimous AI, UNU. It's going to be May 15th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. And here is an AI program that has learned how to predict who's going to be winning, the World Series, or who's going to be winning the Kentucky Derby, and who's going to be winning presidential elections. So it's an incredible notion that AIs can gather enough data to make predictions of things that betting pools assume are kind of random. So that's May 15th, and look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll send out everybody who watched this webinar. We'll send out links to your website and to the amazing work that you do, Stephen. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Bye, everybody.